Okay, now we're just starting online. Just want to do a quick introduction to everybody. This is the College Prep English class. I believe that Diana is out there joining us, though her microphone is turned off. I'm hoping, Diana, that you may want to join us in our discussion of things. And let me share the screen and see how things work there. And we will be off and going. Okay, I believe we're sharing the screen, and now we've been discussing the topic that we're going to be working on today. Here they are, and that topic was happiness. Now, I assumed the official proposition to be happiness is a valid goal in life, whereas Xander, who came up with the idea, is now mitigating it and perhaps vitiating it a little bit, and we'll explain that.
I will explain that.
Okay. Yes, go on with what you were explaining.
No, the idea that I had for discussion was there's an assumption that happiness is good. It's all over the place. If you look even a little bit, you'll see examples of it everywhere. There's an assumption that happiness is good, and as far as I know, that's the case. But the discussion was going to be, why is happiness good? Not, is it the most important thing? Should it be a life's goal? But is it good at all? And why is it good?
That's an interesting point. Now, did you see all of the things that were posted in the class in response to this presentation? I wish I could have a sign up here.
By good, do you mean beneficial?
Okay.
Because I think good could be interpreted either as, well, obviously happiness is a pleasant feeling.
Yeah.
And so people like it, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's good. But there are things that show that happiness might be actually beneficial, because, say, like a study shows that more stressed people are more likely to not have a good period of longevity.
Indeed, stress does seem to be contradictory to health.
So if happiness eliminates stress or wards it off, then it could be beneficial to your health.
That would take us to another question. Is good health a good thing? Is longevity a good thing?
That actually, when I presented this thing to my mom in the car last week, driving away from class, that was more or less what she said, and that was my response. Which led to another thing, and that leads into a whole other discussion, which we could also do, that I've been thinking about for a while. But in this case, to narrow the topic, is we can do here, and to get away from really strange things. I was thinking of happiness as being good in itself. It could be good through other things. Maybe if something is beneficial to your health, then it's good, because if being healthy was in itself a good thing, and happiness made you healthy, then happiness would be good through that. I was thinking of happiness as being good in itself.
Yes, it's a fine distinction. And this could actually lend itself to many discussions. I remember some that took place in college when I was there, going off in strange directions, trying to define the happiness quotient of the world and the happiness quotient of the universe. It's not as though it's a definable thing, but it's a useful concept, perhaps, to refer to when trying to determine the the ideal way to solve a particular problem? Does it indeed increase the happiness quotient of the universe? And should we include animals in that? Should we include the ecosystem in that? And all kinds of other questions. These aren't answerable questions necessarily, but they're perhaps useful tactics for thinking about things. And of course, you can come up with all kinds of strange sets of morality that involve, I mean, what is and is not moral, maybe, or is or is not conducive to happiness, maybe based on all kinds of different arbitrary things, and one can come up with all kinds of strange thoughts on that. This discussion is really what I wanted to focus on a little bit today, and as always, as you folks have been thus far doing very effectively, please keep the language on a relatively formal level, so that and avoid non-semantic uses of the word "like," for example, as a mitigating factor. And I'd like to look at some of the other things that I posted up. A number of things occurred to me in response to this question about happiness, most of them involving the discussion of what is conducive to happiness rather than whether indeed it is a valid goal in itself and of value in itself. But there are some that attack both. Has anybody looked at Epicurus and the Epicureans?
I did not. Too much else to do this week.
Okay, nobody else? Okay. The Conquest of Happiness by Bertrand Russell. I've put these into our high priority assignments because they really, I don't think I'd put Epicurus in there, but Bertrand Russell's thing, which is really quite fascinating, his Conquest of Happiness. How does one achieve it? And he goes into his history of having gone through a really dreadful depression as a teenager, and having found things that really worked for him very effectively, and he lived to nearly 100 and accomplished an immense amount in that time, including Nobel Prize in Literature. He created a number of or introduced a number of fundamental changes in the concept of logic that we use. And he worked with Einstein on a collaborative effort in the 50s, which might be worth looking at also, the Einstein-Russell Manifesto, I think they called it, which was an effort to prevent the proliferation of nuclear weapons. Anyway, remarkable character and a remarkable mind. So much of what he was fascinating, but I hadn't before read his Conquest of Happiness, which I just did and found that that is also a fascinating thing to look at, and his language is superb. Also, I threw up, so this is a very simple concept, the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism. These don't in themselves necessarily lead one very far, because they're not full of data, they're not full of information, they're concepts. Suffering exists, there is a cause for suffering, there is a way to relieve suffering, and here are the steps you can go through to achieve that in very simple terms. But his contention is that the cause of suffering is attachment to things, and relinquishing that attachment is worthwhile. It's an interesting question too. I also wanted to present on a lighter note, and also on a very sound literary note, this little The Baffled Grumbler. Did you read that? Did you listen to it?
I read it.
Right.
Okay. I had the video there of it too, and that's a delightful concept in a way also. And it's of course very tongue-in-cheek, but in a way it attacks the issue very closely. I'd like to look at that further, and I would also like to discuss the issue further. The question is, which should we do first? Do you mind if we go through and do a quick read of this? One of the reasons I'd like to do that is Gilbert was an amazing wordsmith. Every syllable, every rhyme is in just the right place.
Is it? I actually thought there was an issue with the second line there.
When all goes right and nothing goes wrong.
I thought not might work better than nothing. When all goes right and not goes wrong.
Had you made it a single syllable, it would indeed work. This has one extraneous syllable, which is generally fairly acceptable. It's nice, as you say, to avoid extraneous syllables if you can, and making it into naught would probably have been nicer in a way, but slightly more archaic. But a very good point. So this is the refrain. Oh, don't the days seem lank and long when all goes right and nothing goes wrong? And isn't your life extremely flat with nothing whatever to grumble at? Now, this is part of something longer. Let's take a look at it, if you don't mind. Although I know you have all kinds of other things, other points to make here. Let's just look at this for its literary value. Whene'er I poke sarcastic joke, replete with malice spiteful, the people vile politely smile and vote me quite delightful. Notice there's not a syllable in the wrong place there, and you've got all the rhymes. It's A, B, B, A, and then it goes on to it's got these very short lines that rhyme with each other. And every line rhymes. So notice that he's talking here about his resentment of the consideration that other people are giving him, the resentment of the fact that everybody's being so nice. So whenever I poke sarcastic joke, replete with malice spiteful. In other words, this is full of maliciousness and spite, and yet people don't take it amiss and simply regard it as pleasant and delightful. And he goes on then. Now, when a wight sits up all night, ill-natured jokes devising, and all his wiles are met with smiles, it's hard. There's no disguising. Oh, don't the days seem lank and long when all goes right and nothing goes wrong? And isn't your life extremely flat with nothing whatever to grumble at? When German bands for music stands play Wagner imperfectly, I bid them go. They don't say no, but trot off. But off they trot directly. The organ boys, they stop their noise with readiness surprising, and grinning herds of hurdy-gurds retire apologizing. And then we have the refrain again. Don't the days seem lank and long? I've offered gold in sums untold to all who'd contradict me. I've said I'd pay £1 a day to anyone who kicked me. I've bribed with toys great vulgar boys to utter something spiteful. But bless you know, they will be so confoundedly politeful. In short, these aggravating lads, they tickle my tastes, they feed my fads, they give me this, they give me that, and I've nothing whatever to grumble at. I couldn't help bringing that in. It's just so wonderfully done, and it's the opposite, of course, of what we're talking about in a sense. It's saying, okay, I exult in misery. I exult in adversity, in immorality, if you'd like. And that's indeed where he derives his happiness. Is this valid? Same thing is presented in Bertrand Russell. It's interesting.
Valid?
Well, is it a valid approach to happiness? And is perhaps the aversion to happiness deserving of this kind of sarcasm. Where do you stand on that?
He's being sarcastic.
Well, don't you think this is in a way sarcasm?
It seems absurd that someone could actually think and believe that.
But then again, it would be, we have so many things, like what makes an interesting story, the adversity and the
Conflict.
the conflict, yeah.
Yeah, conflict is an essential part of every story.
Yeah. So if everything was just pleasant and nice in a story, it wouldn't be very interesting, would it?
I can't think of the word, but I'm not sure it would even be a story then. It's
Yeah.
almost like, it would almost just be a log of a good day.
Or a log of a lifetime of just goodness.
And then I went to the beach and it was nice and sunny. And I sat down and talked with my friend. And then I went and got ice cream. And then it doesn't even sound like a story.
Right.
Because, like I said, there's no conflict. There's nothing interesting even remotely.
You
In
have
the
to have
conflict-
dark to show light.
In this case,
There's no contrast.
yeah. I'm not sure needing dark to show light is the light thing. I was need dark to show light. I was told that it is an informal logical fallacy to say that you have to have bad if you want good, which makes sense from some ways of looking at it, but that's a different discussion.
You have to have variation, I suppose. Insipidity, I think, may be the word you were seeking.
I'm not familiar with it.
That which is insipid, vapid, colorless, uninteresting. Insipidity then is the noun formed from that. And yes, indeed, one needs something of something spicy, something mildly adversarial at least,
Exciting.
in order. Yeah.
Tapatio.
And in fact, the conflict was something that Bertrand Russell discussed in his material there. This is the question. There are indeed, or have been, movements that disparage the seeking of pleasure of any sort, and the Latin phrase memento mori was common throughout much of the Middle Ages. Memento mori means remember that you're going to die. Remember that, and that's what we're all aiming at, and that's where we're all going to be. Let's end up being miserable, and self-flagellation and these sort of things were common in various different schools and different mindsets. Question is that better? Or there are schools of thought in which one is regarded as having been given a mandate to be happy, regardless of what misery one is going through. We find that in Jewish traditions. Are there any thoughts on those? Okay. Throw some other ideas up here. Epicureanism. Epicurus was often misinterpreted. I think that Epicureanism, if we look it up, it's often associated with hedonism, and perhaps even the philosophy of the connoisseur, seeking out the ultimate pleasures in everything as much as possible. But Epicurus looked at it in more of a long-term perspective. Did anybody read anything about this at all?
No, I've definitely heard the name.
Yeah.
Well, his contention was, of course, among many other things, he had a lot of interesting ideas, but one of them was that if you seek pleasure, just about any form of pleasure seeking has long-term negative effects. And that includes overindulgence in practically anything, whether it's alcohol or sex or overeating or whatever it is. The long-term effects are not going to induce happiness, and therefore happiness is best achieved by moderation, because that way one is going to remain healthy and not cause other major problems. And the result is very much the same attitude as one finds in many other systems of thought. Basically, we're approaching something in which, for example, happiness can result from being kind to other people. And so we end up doing the same things that one might regard as altruism, even if we're putting them under the envelope or under the umbrella of sort of a mild hedonism. Does this make any sense?
Yeah, I think so.
And so he came up with a lot of very interesting ideas, and I recommend his thoughts there. I'm trying to determine where you folks all stand on these ideas, and I'm hoping that you may want to express your thoughts on them to some extent.
I don't think happiness in itself is always the best, my favorite thing, I guess. I personally enjoy, like you said, variety sometimes. And I enjoy some amounts of gloom. Rainy days have always been my preferred choice over sunny days for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
It might have just been more interesting.
Yeah. And not so blazingly hot.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's Southern California.
Yeah,
so-
that's true. I might not enjoy cloudy days if I was living in, I don't know, the Midwest.
Yeah.
There's supposed to be a special, I've heard on the internet, there's a sort of special sort of particularly depressing rain in England where it just sort of is gray and drizzles on you. And it's not nice like rain here, it's really just depressing.
Indeed.
Sounds nice.
And I think if we got it here, in the quantity that they get it there, we would probably think the same thing of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. And in a way, it's the second chapter, I believe the second chapter in the Russell book, he talks about Byronic misery when he's talking about the poetic movement at the end of the 19th century, which we've discussed a little bit before, I believe, in which one simply resigns oneself to the misery and adversity of the universe and accepts it as inevitable, and manages to produce something worthwhile out of it. And in a way that almost approaches existentialism. But it was criticized for being, okay, well, you're just reveling in your misery and making it into a delight of some sort, and that there may be something behind that, but the thought was that there was more to it. One thing that comes to mind, we ended up looking here at a little bit of Gilbert and Sullivan. That's where this one comes from. Where is it? The Baffled Grumbler, and it comes from Princess Ida, which is not one of his more famous ones, but one of his utterly delightful plays. is called patience. Are you familiar with patience?
Well,
You mentioned it.
Yeah.
Have I? Okay. Um,
We watched a little bit of it.
hmm
okay. It's about that movement at the end of the 19th century, but it had some delightful things in it. I just thought I'd bring it up in case it was something that we'd like to go into further. But then if I've done that before and you've had the opportunity to look at it further and haven't done so, then that's as much as needs to be done. Okay, are there any other thoughts on our primary discussion issue here? Let's bring up our agenda. My intent here was, of course, to provide you with some interesting, what I consider to be interesting insights on perspectives on this issue. And I was hoping that you would come up with some as well. Now, Sandra, you presented some interesting thoughts there. But from the perspective, for example, of theological background, how would we thence approach happiness? Is it a justifiable goal or isn't it?
According to the Bible?
Yeah. Because, of course, the memento mori was grounded firmly in medieval Christianity.
I suppose it could be, well, my understanding of Christian theology is that we're supposed to seek for a thing that's much deeper than happiness called joy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a different thing entirely.
And that's not dependent on happiness.
In a way, happiness is, in Christianity, it is your goal. You know, you want to get to heaven because you'll get to live forever and be happy. You want to know God because, you know, it will give you the satisfaction of knowing Him, and it will give you knowledge and understanding, which will make you happy to know those things. And so, in a way, it is the goal through other things, sort of.
Your interesting distinction between joy and happiness, because indeed, if you look them up in the dictionary, I think you'll find they're probably refer to each other as synonyms.
I think we discussed this already.
Have we?
I think we looked it up.
You did?
I don't remember.
Maybe it was.
It might have been, yeah, we might have done that also. Not here, though.
Okay.
Yes, I suspect that might have been elsewhere.
I also think the questions of happiness as a goal can be answered more easily because they're thought about more. It's more, information's more readily available. The answers are more obvious around us. Like in Christianity, you look at all the things that, as a Christian, you're supposed to strive for, and all of them will probably make you happy. And it, you know, seems like that might be the reason why you're doing them. If it's not the goal, it's a part of the goals. And then for other applications, or for other things in life, you can contrast it with, or compare it with other potential goals of, say, things dealing with selflessness or facing trials that will be painful, but in the end will be for the better good, and then happiness can no longer be your primary goal because there are other things that are more good than it. Maybe the happiness of thousands of other people, or even more. And so that's why I wasn't picking that particular thing to begin with, because it's easy to think about and already been thought about.
Yeah. No, it's a very good point. And of course, all of these things have been argued endlessly throughout the centuries. Does anybody have anything else to contribute? Okay, let's go on to the agenda. Okay, so please look at these if you haven't already. The Backward Grumbler, and we really ought to listen to it. It's so. Do you think we dare try to listen to this?
Which one is that?
I'm not sure I was here whenever you were having problems with video, so I can't give an opinion on that.
Right. What's the vote?
Well, I've already seen it.
You have.
Oh, yeah?
Okay.
Well, I have.
You two don't communicate that much, do you?
No.
Not really.
Okay, no, that's fine. I don't generally like to take class time for that. You've had an opportunity to watch it. Very nice. All right. Newly added to high priority assignment, the Bathroom Grumbler, and you've all looked at that. And I put in 2 new interviews here. Specifically, I wanted to find things that are happening right now. And I tend to follow specific characters whose oratory I enjoy listening to and want to share. If you can find more, by all means, as I always say, please submit them. Berlinski is fascinating and often somewhat irritating, and certainly a couple of standard deviations outside the norm as far as thinking is concerned. But he's very good. And let's see here, Berlinski and Glenn Greenwald, both of whom speak with a fecundity that belies their American roots. This is probably unfair to Americans, but the fact is that you will find that kind of eloquence fairly common among the Oxbridge lot, but it's harder to find among Americans, even academics.
Is that a real word, Oxbridge?
It's a portmanteau, okay, which some people don't like at all, especially those from Oxford. But but it is the two of them thrown together, and it is used. And I probably shouldn't use it. Good question. Okay, Greenwald has really made the news lately. Does anybody know anything about what's happened with him?
No.
Okay, well, he's just come out with a book last week. And what's it called? No Place to Hide. And it's about his personal experiences with Edward Snowden, the whistleblower, and the whole saga of how that unfolded and what took place and what was released. And it's been a continual process. Snowden turned a lot of documents over to a number of different journalists in different places and asked that they go through them very carefully to make sure that the material presented was that which was of value to the people and not that which was likely to cause harm to governments or anybody in particular. And of course, this was left up to the journalists. And so it's coming out sort of piecemeal. But Greenwald, with the publication of his book, has come into this country. He's been living in Brazil, and he has been threatened with prison and all kinds of things. Yes, here.
Oh, wow.
And so he wasn't sure whether he would be arrested as soon as he came into the country or not. But he is, or was, a constitutional attorney himself, and I think in a way he was daring them to do it, because after all, as a journalist, presumably he would be protected by the Fourth Amendment, and the Fourth Amendment is what a good deal of this revelation is all about. Now, what he says may indeed not be all that popular, and you may not agree with it, but there are few people who have their words as readily available as he does. Greenwald is constantly astounding me at the accessibility of the words he has. And he always gets the right one. He can get a string of just the right words in the right order. And it's remarkable. it's improvisatory, and it really approaches the level of what one might expect from a Jonathan Miller or Terry Eagleton. Although he does drop some standard grammatical errors that are common to all Americans, though they're still regarded as errors on the SAT and errors if you're turning in a scholarly paper, but still American academics have accepted those things into the language. Berlinski is immensely educated in so many different fields. Mathematics is his major field. I don't know how many languages he speaks, but he is certainly taught in a number of different languages. And he writes beautifully and tends not to agree with things that are generally accepted. Did anybody get a chance to watch this one?
Yes.
Good, very good.
I didn't get to do.
I think it degenerates towards the end, and it gets a little bit murky. I'm not sure what he was on about at the end. But what did you think of it? Okay.
I don't remember exactly what I thought of, but I remember that I thought his he is very I can't think of a better term, but I would say honest-minded. He seems to take things very literally, and is even less biased in. I've been trying to be unbiased in my views of things like evolution stuff, but he is very good with that. The things he's saying are things that are very logical, and I appreciated that when I was watching it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I tended to agree with him. I didn't understand a whole lot of what was being said, but I tended to agree with what I did understand.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I said I felt it became a bit murky towards the end. I'm not really even sure where he was leading with some of his discussion of things that must be discussed and must be understood. But I'm not sure exactly why or even how he was categorizing them towards the end of it. But at the beginning, indeed, his major focus was the tyranny of science. And that's an interesting one because, of course, those who are supporting science as the solution to all the world's problems are regarding the scientific method, and especially the peer review process, as one that is self-correcting. But his contention is that they are adopting a specific mindset, and only that is acceptable. And that mindset is dictating to the world and to both the leadership and the people in ways that they won't accept any contradiction. And the foundation, the justification for what they're dictating is not necessarily that valid. And he questions, in fact, global warming. What are some of the other things he questions?
He questions evolution.
Indeed, evolution is his big bugaboo, isn't it? He's written the Devil's Delusion, I think, which was in response to Richard Dawkins' the God Delusion. And
is he a Christian?
Berlinski himself is secular. Although his background is Jewish. And so he doesn't really have an axe to grind one direction or another. But it's interesting that he's taken this particular direction. Indeed, his criticisms are, some of them, really very strident. He didn't go into evolution that much, although most of his articles and most of his lectures are on the subject of evolution. But he addressed a number of other issues, one of which is global warming. What do you folks think of global warming?
To the best of my knowledge, it's bunk completely. There have been many accounts of faking or faking data or using it incorrectly, like taking pictures of the ice caps only at certain times of year to make it look like they're getting smaller when it's just a normal yearly change. There have been instances of charts and graphs showing, look, this is evidence of global warming, when it's showing something else that doesn't necessarily relate. And there's been, I think there was a case where there was a series of emails back and forth between people dealing with, openly with each other, putting out incorrect information for the sake of making people think global warming is actually a thing. And again, to the best of my knowledge, it is completely false. There were some things that were happening that were true that might have affected global climate, but we have fixed those very effectively. And so
what are those?
There were problems with, still are to some extent a little bit, but vehicle, mainly car emissions. There used to be times when there was almost like out of some dystopian science fiction movie or book or something. If you lived, say, in Los Angeles, there would be an air watch for air quality, and there would actually be days when, people weren't supposed to go outside. And my dad described it as being like, if you went outside and took in a deep breath, it hurt to breathe because the air was so bad. And there was a chemical called CFCs. I don't remember what that stands for. But
something chlorofluorocarbons.
Yes, chlorofluorocarbons, that was it. And those were I learned the person who invented those invented a great deal of other things, and the reason we don't hear about him very much now is because just about everything he invented turned out to be bad in actuality. And so the CFCs are one of those. We use those as, I think it's called an aerosol? I don't remember.
Yeah.
They're used in the spray can things for paint or hairspray or whatever it happens to be.
A propellant. Yeah.
And we found out that they don't go away. Yeah, they don't go away on. Oh, there's a bug around here.
Yeah.
They don't go away when they're in the atmosphere, and they were in fact eating away a hole in the ozone layer at one of the poles. And so we had to clean them up ourselves and cease production of them. And that was one of the big things used for radiation, global warming. Oh, there's a hole in the ozone, more stuff will get through and it'll heat up the planet, or it'll cool it down, or it'll do something. I forget what it actually was, but they used it for global warming. But we fixed that. And so the global warming got started on some bad information, and kind of like Darwinism or macroevolution, it sort of took off, and now they're trying to keep it running so they can keep getting their money.
It's certainly what Berlinski is saying too, isn't it? That it's entirely economically driven.
At this point, yes, I think that is actually the case. For global warming, evolution has religious and philosophical stuff with it as well. But global warming at this point is, as far as I know, entirely a monetary thing.
Some great thinkers, one of my favorites, in fact, comes up with the response, and this is an interesting one, that there are arguments for and against global warming, and indeed it does seem that the preponderance of scientists are on the global warming bandwagon for whatever reason, and that may be economic, I don't know. But his question is, regardless of whether it's true or false, as long as it's some sort of an unknown, Is it a good idea to play dice with it when we don't have another planet to fall back on?
Yet. That's why we have to get to Mars.
I'm
But
sorry.
don't get me started. I said not yet. That's why I have to get to Mars, but don't get me started on that.
Okay,
That
well,
will take a while.
it's an interesting point. Have you seen Stephen Hawking's articles on that and contentions about that? Well, his response to so much that's going on right now is we, as a species, have a mandate, really, to expand to other planets. And this should take place fairly rapidly before we manage to muck things up thoroughly for ourselves.
I would agree with that. Also, we're expanding on, we're going to overpopulate the planet eventually at the rate we're going, probably pretty soon. And we are starting to run through, or have been running through resources at a kind of alarming pace. I'm under the impression, but can't give much evidence for that, we're not actually going through them as quickly or as badly as environmentalists would like us to believe, but it's still happening.
Yeah,
And
even if
still
it's off
reproducing.
by a factor of 2 or even a factor of 10, it's imminent.
It's still happening. So I would agree with that to some extent, that we do really need to get off planet. And I am also under the impression, with somewhat more evidence, that that will happen within, at most, maybe 2 decades. And that's at most.
Really?
There are a lot of, have you been aware of the various private space industry things going on?
Apparently not. Why don't you bring us up to date?
I'm not aware of all of them. There's a big, for Mars in particular, there's 2 things. I don't know much about one, or even the name. There's one group trying to get something together to send a couple to go to Mars and orbit around and come back. There's a big international non-government, as far as I know, non-government group called Mars One that's actually trying to get stuff together to send people to live on Mars and colonize it outright. You go there, you live there for the rest of your life. There's also 2 American private space companies. There's Virgin Galactic, which is the space part of Virgin Airlines, and I don't know much about that except they have a spaceport and it looks like it came out of a science fiction movie, a realistic one. You can look that up, it's really cool. But I've been following more of the stuff with SpaceX, which you've probably heard the name of, which is, I forget what it's for. The name is a shortened version of something else. They're private space industry. They are they've been working with NASA for a while. They're currently using NASA's launch facilities, but they're working on getting their own. They have been launching, actually, this month, pretty soon, should have been on the 12th, but that got delayed. They were going to launch at a NASA space station on one of their rockets a communication company satellite, which makes it, except for the launch location, a completely commercial private launch into space, which made me really excited because that's happening now. They're working on, they've flown to the International Space Station, but not for people. They have a spacecraft they call the Dragon, which does not, visually speaking, live up to its name. It looks very boring. But it's been used for cargo transfer, taking things to and from the ISS. And they're trying to make that human space-worthy. And put together with that, next year they're going to be testing their new launch vehicle called the Falcon Heavy. And that is going to be the most powerful and most cost-efficient, at the same time, spacecraft since the Saturn V rockets that they used for the Apollo missions. And that should pretty well blow their competitors out of the water. And if they can get the Falcon Heavy coupled with a human-worthy Dragon craft, they'll be able to send people to Mars somewhat easily, and possibly commercially eventually. There'll be other things. Anyways, That's what's
Are
going
they
on.
adequately funded to do that sort of thing? Because
Yeah.
NASA's
No,
freaking
they
funded.
have. They get funding. They get some contracts from NASA. But again, they also do private launches. Most of the stuff they have scheduled for this year, in fact, all of it, as far as I know, outside of testing, is launching company satellites, communication stuff. The stuff that people are worried about because now it's starting to kind of clog up the space around Earth. They're launching that. They're taking contracts for things from companies, and so yes, they are quite well funded. And they're being very successful, and it's not. What I've heard about it isn't people going, "Oh, the Falcon Heavy is going to flop. They won't get the Dragon up." What I've been hearing is other people, like the Russians, are getting kind of worried because they're the other major competitor for satellite launching at the moment, and SpaceX is coming up really fast behind them, and it's a level competitor with them, if not higher than that at this point.
Wow.
So, yes, we are moving much faster than I was under the impression of a few months ago, and
Interesting.
apparently than you were earlier today.
Indeed.
And so,
indeed.
yes, I'm fairly certain, unless there's a truly catastrophic or almost cataclysmic social economic collapse on Earth, we will get people to Mars, and perhaps a colony on Mars within maybe 2 decades. Probably
That was so
probably
well
less.
put. I just wanted to compliment you on your catastrophic and cataclysmic. That's absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any other thoughts on that?
I'm not very
Hi there. Is that Diana?
knowledgeable about that, but
I just learned about it recently. It's so exciting. The thing is, we're living in the future now. The thing that, a couple
No, we're
decades
not.
ago, people called the future, that's now, it's just the beginning of it. I mean, we call them tablets, we have data pads.
Yeah.
We have the Oculus Rift, a virtual reality headset. It blows people's minds with how realistic it
Yeah.
feels when you're wearing it. There's robots everywhere. There's military robots and unmanned vehicles and stuff like that. There's the internet, for crying out loud. Global super communication information network. There's something like primitive holograms over in Japan. I don't know much about that.
yeah.
And we've got commercial spaceflight going on. We're living in the age of science fiction. What we've been dreaming about for a long time, well, a few decades actually, but we've been dreaming about for a long time. We're living in now, but just the beginning of the era. So this is
Hi.
in time to
Hi,
live.
kind of
that's
the
Heather
transition
talking. Okay.
period between.
Yeah.
So glad you could
I'm
join
not
us.
sure the transition. This is the beginning of that period. It's been built good, and now
Also,
I guess with the
speaking
start, that was kind of the transition period.
that
I'm going to read
robots and internet started the
Diana's
transition, and now we're
contribution
really
here when I
in it.
get a chance.
and also, speaking of the future, there is this new invention on Kickstarter where it's kind of like Star Trek, and you scan like a plant, and you see if it needs water or it's overwatered or it's not getting enough sun. And it's just a Kickstarter, so I don't know if it actually works, but they have a prototype already.
Oh, where is this deployed?
I'm sure the program is.
It's a handheld object, and you just take it around with you, and you could check your tires and things like that. Like tire air pressure and that kind of stuff.
That is another excellent example of what I'm talking about. There's
Okay.
all this technology like that, home devices like that. That is their kind of, there's prototypes, there's development versions, there's things just coming out. So much of this stuff is just coming up. And so, like I said, we're living in the beginning of the age of science fiction.
Indeed.
Not as a genre, but as a reality.
It's often occurred to me that colonizing other planets is going to involve some very tricky technology, specifically devices that are perhaps multi-purpose devices, which are at the same time capable of condensing moisture out of the atmosphere and producing atmosphere out of various other purposes, other sources, and so forth.
You should. There's a book that I read on Mars colonization called A Case for Mars that talks about, first of all, why we haven't been there yet, and the answer is disappointing and makes me not like NASA. It has in it a fairly detailed and technical, not like an engineer could look at it and build it, but it has a fairly well thought out plan of how to use technology that we have had for decades to go to Mars within a decade or two of the time the book was written in, which was several years ago.
Okay.
So
Diana sent that 20 minutes ago.
We don't actually need anything particularly tricky to start on it. And we can use technology that we've had and now technology that we have to do it now, more or less. There's only a few
some more clever things have to be developed.
A few, but not much, and maybe not as clever as you think. Certainly not as clever as most people think that we need.
Diana has posted something here. I think it's probably more apropos to what we were discussing previously, but I'd like to read it out so everybody can benefit from it. Though some people are able to achieve great things despite being...
Maybe start on this.
Though some people are able to achieve...
depressed.
Great depressed. If one is unhappy, it is impossible to be successful
despite being
long-term.
Depressed.
Oh,
Though some people are
being
able to
depressed,
achieve...
yes.
I see.
Okay. Yes. Though some people are able to achieve great things despite being depressed, if one is unhappy, it is impossible to be successful long-term. The brain, and here we have to remember, sometimes you need that article, the brain controls all organs and systems in the body. When the brain chemicals, or when brain chemicals, being plural, it doesn't have to have the article, are not balanced, one may become depressed or even physically ill. Indeed, yes.
That's a good point.
This relates to what we were talking about before, and indeed is addressed in a number of these works on happiness of different sorts. I'm thinking, for example, Tola's book on happiness, the Dalai Lama wrote The Art of Happiness. There are a number of different approaches which are so remarkably similar and yet give you a bit of a different perspective on things. Thank you, Diana. I think you posted or pasted some of those parts multiple times and they confused us a little bit.
I have a few thoughts on global warming.
Yes, please.
I think, based on what I know personally,
Thanks.
I don't think it's that great of an issue at this point because...
Thank you, everybody.
I didn't understand that. Did somebody? I'm so sorry. I think that I'm sorry, Diana. I couldn't quite understand. Maybe if you type it in, we'll figure it out. I apologize. Go ahead, Micah, and then we'll.
I think it takes so long for the Earth to go through one of those periods of either more extreme heat, even though, or more extreme heat or more extreme cold,
Weather.
even with the season pattern. It takes so long that I don't think maybe in the fourth generation from now it'll be different from us, but I think it's a very slow transition, and I don't think it's anything to worry about, even if it moves, even say a 50-year period, slightly warmer. I don't think it's gonna, over the grand scheme of things, I don't think it's gonna really affect.
Well, that's
the actual ecosystem, and
that's true, but also no, it's a good point, but it's not what when people talk about global warming, it's not generally something so nice and rational as a natural Earth gradual climate change, which it has done quite obviously in the past. They're talking about guilty humans screwing up the planet. And that is.
And I
what
don't
they
think
talk
there's
about.
much we can do to screw up the planet. I mean, that we haven't fixed already.
Yes. Yeah.
Like you were saying about the CFCs. Obviously, we've removed those and tried to patch up the ozone layer as best we can with our limited ozone patching technology. But I think it's not really something we need to worry about at this point, because there's not really, unless we go into nuclear war or that kind of just really destructive human man-made technology that's destructive to the environment and the Earth and maybe space and other planets. It's not really something we need to worry about right now.
No.
How do you feel about the destruction of the oxygen-producing elements on Earth, or destruction of rainforests, for example, which are responsible, I gather, for maintaining the mix of oxygen in the atmosphere, and indeed in the past have been known to produce a very different mixture, which was conducive to different kinds of life. And the fact that we are, I won't use the word decimating, because the real meaning for that is inappropriate. It means reducing it by 1/10. But let's say extirpating or even deracinating our rainforests is a dangerous thing to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also don't enjoy extremely large bugs. Sorry.
It's all right.
Go ahead.
Oh. Yeah, but okay, but about humans polluting, there are still quite a few third world countries out there who are major polluters, especially eastern part of China.
And India.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, yeah,
It's horrible.
but yeah,
Yeah.
if you were to go to a Chinese port city, you would. It's sometimes hard to see the next. Ship or skyscraper or something, because there's so much smog.
Can't even
Yeah.
see the sun.
Yeah, you can't
So-
really
Yeah,
see the sun. People wear masks because it's so bad.
When I lived in China,
I wasn't aware of that.
we lived in an apartment complex, and we lived on the school apartment complex, and in other people's backyards or like empty lots, people just burned trash.
Yeah.
And same in India. There's people just burning plastic even. And it smells awful. It's hard to breathe, and it creates a horrible sun blocking.
Right.
Life expectancy reducing.
Yes.
Oh yeah, people have been dying
Yeah.
because
Smoke
of the smog.
and smog.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was not aware of that.
Yeah, they're
It's
dying a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, and the technology is not as clean as most first world countries and even second world countries.
Good point.
Indeed, I
yeah.
gather China is really
Yeah.
suffering from that right now.
Oh yeah.
And the cut birth rate. And
Oh, they've
the
let that come back up.
yeah, but and then in India, culturally, and also in, I guess, historically in China, they just killed off the female babies because of the dowry system, and it was just so expensive to have a girl in the house, and it was so beneficial to have a boy. And that's like, so there are thousands, and now they're all grown up, and there are thousands of unmarried men, and they can't reproduce, and they can't, culturally it created a lot of problems. I know it's particularly in India and China. So.
Well, of course, we talked a little bit about overpopulation earlier on in this discussion. Isn't that a worthy topic to address? I mean, indeed, the human being, let's just look at this with a little perspective and think about it in terms of species and the rise and fall of populations. The human being is at present a plague.
Yeah.
Human being is an infestation. If we look at that in terms of any other species, if another species had reproduced with the effectiveness of ours, we would regard it as an infestation and expect it, in fact, to decline eventually. Ours seems not to be doing that because we're capable artificially of avoiding those things which tend to cause a population to decline, predation being a major one. We've eliminated the big predators, and we're still dealing with the microbial predators, but we've managed to stave this off for so long. Doesn't that put us perhaps in a very untenable position? Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Well, we could always go back a few hundred years ago.
What?
Well, I mean, have technology be that a few hundred years ago. That would do the trick, but I'm not really quite sure if that's a good idea.
Mars.
Okay, this is
What do you mean by that,
If you
Dawson?
make it,
Yeah, but,
if you make it commercially viable, even if it's difficult to go to Mars and colonize it and live there, people will do it. That happened with America. It became generally speaking, it was a better place to go, and it was difficult to get there, but it was possible. And because people wanted to be somewhere else, that was better, and that was somewhere else that was better, they went. If you set up another planet the same way, then you could have a global effect. Of course, what also might happen is a whole bunch of the intelligent, wealthy, generally good people leave, and then you have an imbalance on Earth, which might be interesting and very destructive.
Interesting.
It'll be fine
The
on
inverse of the Golgafringians.
But I think that's kind of a temporary solution because just like here in America and basically everywhere else where the Europeans colonized, it's only it's been about 500 years now, and we're starting to overpopulate again, and so that means that once we colonize Mars, and after a few hundred years or a few thousand years or something, however long it takes.
Nearly that long. Once
Yeah.
you do one, it'll seem like, oh, why not do the next one?
But
Of course, there's
then
not an easy next one.
yeah,
No.
well, yeah, see, yeah,
But
that's
we'll-
the problem.
yeah,
We have to
we'll
find
still go.
a plan.
And indeed, I gather the atmosphere of Mars has less than 1% of the
Yeah.
You
Density of
cannot
Mars.
breathe
Mhm.
Martian atmosphere. You
Yeah.
can't be, exposed in Martian atmosphere because it's so cold and so thin. You depressurize probably, depending on where you are.
Which is why
Yeah.
terraforming would be a really mandatory thing.
Yeah, that could be.
But I'm really
Difficult.
curious about what you said. Just go back to technology 200 years ago. What is that a solution to?
It's a solution to overpopulating, and I guess also
He wants to
climate
artificially
change.
reduce life expectancy.
yeah, and okay, I can think of about 4 different ideas. That's one of them. Going to Mars and other planets. That's another. Another one is to kill off a bunch of humans somehow.
God, you're cruel.
Which
Yeah.
is of course awful.
Just leave.
and-
Just go to another planet. That's better for everyone.
Yeah, but
What are the other two?
yeah, but there's but there's also just making it mandatory switching every few decades to only having 1 or 2 children and switching off 1 or 2
Or-
decades.
Well,
So this way,
I think you'll have an issue there with what was it called, prohibition? Whenever that was, a few decades ago, said no alcohol, and because I think that will be the case with that. people like having children, and if you tell everybody, especially the Americans, don't have children, they'll say no.
Yeah,
Don't do that. We'll shoot you if you try to take our kids.
Yeah, no, but
We'll
these
do
are
worse
just
if you try to
ideas.
kill them. So, I think that's another option, much harder than going to Mars. We could go underwater.
Go underwater?
The other 70% of the planet that we haven't
Yeah.
lived in.
Yeah.
It is actually harder, though. It's much harder. It's easier to go to Mars than Venus because it's easier to heat up a cold environment than cool down a hot one. Same thing, Mars and the ocean. It's easier to pressurize an unpressurized environment than depressurize a super pressurized one.
Very interesting
Those are
points.
just some random ideas.
Heather has
I'm not
Yeah,
going to
pretty
be the
random,
leader
I
of the
have to
world
say.
ever.
Heather has evinced an interest in
Sure.
saying something here. Heather, would you like to make your contribution?
Yeah, it's about Mars. There used to be water on Mars, but it's gone now, and I don't understand. I forgot actually how it's gone. Like what happened to it? Does anyone know?
Andrew will explain this to you.
The water is not gone. It's still on Mars. The water on
Well,
Mars
where-
is frozen or underground, and probably both. There is evidence of there's clear evidence of water at the poles, although a lot of the Martian ice caps are actually dry ice, carbon dioxide. But there's water there. There's this huge northern basin that is kind of like, to my understanding, there's something of an ocean frozen into the soil there. Like, it's huge amounts of water, and there's we've seen evidence of flowing water on Mars in the past few years. A little
Really?
bit. Yes. There was a crater where a satellite flew over and took a picture of it, and a few months or a year later it went over and took a picture again, and there's a feature there, a distinctly water-like flow feature that was not there in the last picture. There was water flowing on that spot, or an alien dropped its cup, I don't know, but there was water flowing on that spot. So there is water on Mars. It flows at least sometimes, and there's evidence that there's actually quite a lot of water on Mars. It's just not on the surface flowing like we see on Earth.
But it would therefore be accessible.
Yeah, so that is where the water went. It froze. Now it's-
Do you think that the water unfroze because of the orbit and its distance from the sun?
More likely, I don't know. If it was the case, then well, first of all, it was coming from underground, and so I don't know how water works underground. It might have got pushed out by something. It might just be flowing anyways. But if it was a temperature change, it would be like on Earth. Earth seasons don't happen because we get closer and farther from the sun. Like our summer, where we live, is when we are the furthest from the sun, because our seasons are caused by the tilt of Earth's axis, and I'm not going to try to explain that right now. But Mars has seasons in the same way. It has seasons based on axial tilt.
Mm-hmm.
So if it was a temperature change, it would be seasons, not distance.
Okay, and bear with me. Since the Earth has a different atmosphere than Mars does, and Mars, well, I think Mr. Chishnell said only 1% atmosphere. Would that have anything to do with, maybe the weather there? I don't know.
What do you mean by weather?
Well, I mean just hot or cold, really.
Yes, it's very, very, very cold, always.
Because of the atmosphere?
It's because there basically isn't any. It's there and it's visible, but it's so little that it's always cold. I mean, to my knowledge, it's always cold. When it's in the day, it might not be like the moon. Our moon has no atmosphere, or you can get really picky and say that sometimes it has a little bit of atmosphere, but effectively speaking, it has no atmosphere. And its days are extremely hot. But I think Mars is cold because it's so far from the sun and because it has so little atmosphere, it just doesn't get the sunlight needed to warm it up, and it doesn't have the atmosphere to hold in what it's got.
Okay. And then, if one of the ways, I guess, then the only way to colonize Mars, or maybe one of the ways, would be to add atmosphere, because I don't see how else you would be able to live there. And I
That's
don't even know how you do that.
that's terraforming Mars, which would be a somewhat distant future, very huge project that requires knowledge and technology that we don't have. Well, probably, definitely knowledge we don't have. We might be able to pull it off with the tech we've got. But you don't have to live on Mars, you know, in your t-shirt and shorts, walking around in the sun, although it'll look smaller from out there. No, I mean, you don't have, I mean, we have people that effectively live in space for periods of time on the International Space Station, and we didn't terraform space for them to live there, we just built a thing that they can live in. There are underwater habitats, not many of them, that people live in for periods of time, and there's polar things we've made, and we didn't change the region, we just made a little bubble to live in, and that's how it would be on Mars. You just,
At least for a while, until we got the smarts and the good technology to terraform it, if we were going to live there semi-normally for a while.
yes, but for, you know, to initially colonize Mars, you just need buildings that you can live in. Something that has a self-contained, human-compatible habitat. You don't need to terraform it to live there, or to colonize it. Terraforming is the last thing you do, because it's such a huge undertaking and requires so much resources and such understanding that we don't have. Living there is relatively easy.
Interesting.
Relatively.
Yes, relatively easy. It's not as hard as you might think, but it's also not easy.
The big distinction there between between launching a bubble into orbit or living in a bubble under the sea is it takes quite a while to get stuff there,
Yes.
and a lot of investment, a lot more investment, wouldn't it?
The comparisons between space and ocean are interesting. It would take maybe less time to get something underwater, but it's actually a lot harder to make something that works underwater than in space. That's actually why we have the International Space Station, and there's, I think, a Chinese one up there now, and there's been other space stations. What are you laughing at?
What about happiness on Mars, Heather? Very little happiness, it would appear.
But we haven't
well,
yet developed the happiness generator yet.
I'm not sure.
What does it run on?
Yeah, no. It's called laughing gas. It's definitely not
That's it.
very good.
Anyways, it is much easier to live in space. Oh yeah, we're running out of time, aren't we?
Have a good week. I gather we will have class next week. I'm not sure. I think we've just got 2 more weeks, but we'll discuss that. And if you want to go further, we'll discuss that too.
Sure.
Okay?
Thank
Have a good week.
Goodbye.
Thank you for
Bye.
your contributions. Unfortunately, I wanted to get into discussing the rest of the items and trying to figure out what we're going to do next.
Oh well, I'll finish up what I was
Please,
saying.
please go ahead.
I'm not sure there's much more to finish up, but basically it's easier to live in space than underwater. You can see this in the professional decisions made to live in space rather than underwater. There have been numerous, and some very large, mainly the International Space Station, human habitats in space. There have been rather few and not very large, usually quite small human habitats made for underwater. It's just too hard to continuously depressurize an underwater environment, and then there's all the other issues of there's the currents, there's the creatures, there's the clogging of any ventilation or anything that deals with the water outside going through. There's so many issues for making something work underwater, and in space, it's relatively simple. You know, you just have something that keeps the radiation out and everything else in and maintains what's inside, and you're good. There's relatively little to deal with outside.
Right.
Do you think
corrosion would be a major problem?
Yes,
I should mention.
corrosion as well is another issue underwater. I mean, maybe in space there's things that might run into it, but that's not the same thing. And it's
space
easier
is
to deal
kind
with.
of like a buffer because there's nothing really there?
No, well,
I mean, it's not a buffer, but there's just a lack of stuff.
There is actually a lot out there. There's a lot of nothingness in between things, but there's actually a lot out there. Like,
But
okay,
water is just
here's
there.
an example. Something that yes.
Whereas
but
space, there's like you said, there's a lot of nothing.
There's actually
in between
dust
all this
everywhere
stuff.
in space, like literally everywhere. At night, I haven't seen this for myself, but I've been told in my astronomy class, if you go out at night, if it's I think preferably a new moon, so no moon is what that actually means at night. You wait for however long you want, and you figure out where the sun is on the other side of Earth. Like if you're to look at the ground, look where the sun is, and you face exactly the opposite direction, and it needs to be very dark to be able to see this, there will be a little patch of kind of silvery light directly opposite the sun. And I forget exactly
Because it's acting
why.
like a mirror between you and the sun.
No, I don't know. I forget exactly why it's there, but what it is light reflecting off the dust in space, and you can see it right there. So there.
With the naked eye?
Yeah, space is less empty than people think.
And
It's very
this
empty,
is only
but it's still
because
there.
there's one little spot up there that's in the shadow of the Earth, and the moon's light is otherwise making it impossible to see
The
it.
moon's light would get in the way. It would make the sky too light. The moon actually gets in the way of observing.
Okay,
in
so
astronomy.
in other words, yeah, but the sun, Earth is casting a bit of a shadow of the sun in exactly the spot that you're describing. Is that why you're able to see this?
I
No.
don't remember.
It's casting light everywhere, but like a mirror, if you shine light from somewhere relatively behind you, and you cast it at a mirror, it hits your eyes, and that's kind of like a pointed.
It might
thing,
be
and
light that's
so-
bent around Earth to come back. It might be light coming off of Earth.
Sounds like
reflecting off of
something
space. I don't
deserves
remember.
a bit more.
Yes,
study.
it's probably in my astronomy notes, but I don't remember. Anyways, there's dust in space. You can see it at night if it's dark.
Is it kind of like a reflecting telescope? Because it's just in one spot?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Well, you said that it only shines in one spot. Is that similar to a reflecting telescope?
I
Like it acts in a similar way?
don't think so. I don't
Okay.
quite understand, but I don't think so.
Okay. And then one last thing. I know I'm back to Mars again. How would you even get food? Like, you'd have to send a vessel with lots of food on there and then, like, drive your Mars car to go get it. I'm just skeptical is all.
You grow it there. Martian soil with slight modification is pretty good for growing plants in. And there's water on Mars, and you'd have to manufacture your own atmosphere, but I mean, the International Space Station regulates its own stuff very efficiently, and so it's possible to make your own breathable atmosphere on Mars from, well, what's there is carbon dioxide, and that's, dioxide, there's oxygen there, it's just coupled with carbon. And so there's atmosphere there, and there's water there, and there's soil there, and with slight modification to each, you can grow plants. You just, you need to bring starting food, and then you need to bring seeds and have a habitat set up for the plants. But it's entirely possible to grow stuff on Mars. If you're curious about this, read the book called A Case for Mars. It explains all of this very well. It's a lot easier to live on Mars than people have been made to believe.
Would you mind?
I will read this book.
Very, very, very good. Heather, would you, Xander, mind posting that? Maybe you can post it as a response to our agenda or something so that people will be able to look at what you've been referring to.
I could post the name and maybe a link
Right.
to the Wikipedia article.
It's obviously a book that's under copyright, so we'd have to post a link to
Yes.
somewhere one could
It's
get
fairly
it.
recent.
Very
And
good.
then I'm going to look for the Stephen Hawking article on Mars. I'm not sure if it's
I will try to find that if you'd like. Hawking has done a number of video presentations, and they're all on YouTube. But finding out exactly which one he's talking about Mars in, I have to hunt around a little bit. But they're very good. Let's see what we can do with that, and I'll see if I can find something.
I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem, Heather. Let's just wind things up. Much of the rest of this was revisiting things that I brought up last week, but nobody had been able to see yet or looked at yet. And so I just thought I'd ask whether there was any further discussion. Had you all seen the bar song and the doll song and barcarolle, and of course whether anybody has watched any more Western tradition, and whether you found any bugs in Prover.
The bar song and
I
the
have
doll
been watching the
crawl.
Western tradition. Not so much in the past few days, but shortly after last class, I started from the beginning and was about to start watching the Rome videos again. So I've watched quite a few.
Quite a few indeed.
Yeah, I've loved that series.
It's wonderful, isn't it?
It is
Absolutely wonderful. And inflicted upon the rest of your family. I hate to use that particular verb, but it might be appropriate. It's worth sharing around because
I've told them about it. My dad would probably be the only one who could actually watch it and get anything out of it or find it remotely interesting. But I have mentioned it to them and told them about it. And
Wonderful.
other people. So.
You'd be amazed in a homeschooling family how much effect just turning something on and letting it go while you're doing other things can have a lot of very positive. Okay, let's just wind things up today. I'd like to determine whether there are any future projects that we would like to jump into. Does anybody have any? The one for today was happiness.
And Mars.
And Mars, it turns out.
And global warming.
And global warming. Any suggestions for discussion for next week? And indeed, would anyone like to do a presentation or a recitation?
If a presentation means the sort of speaking I was doing for much of this class, I am always happy to do that.
I think you did an exemplary job. I thought that was very nice, and everybody's contributions were good. But listening to that kind of expository prose is really one of the best things for one's linguistic ear, if you know what I mean. And so I really think was a very worthwhile class.
I would like to know more about human genetic modification. And like technological advances in improving human maximum ability.
Okay.
Like upgrading.
I don't know anything about that.
You can upgrade a robot or a machine. Obviously, computers are way better than when they first started. It took up entire rooms and needed entire refrigerator systems. And now we have them in our pockets. And we have them in our everything.
This certainly sounds like a topic we could
upgraded ourselves ever. Besides just keeping ourselves healthy. With medical advances.
That would be for that you should look into the realms of we would get into a little bit of theology, I think, possibly philosophy, dealing with whether or not
ethics,
it's right.
We're going to see,
but whether, ethics aside, there would be a little bit of theology, but mostly biochemistry, because an idea that's gotten into my head as I've been reading Darwin's Black Box, which I need to continue doing, is I'm doubtful whether that's even possible, because we seem to have been made, it would seem. We have been made very, very carefully and precisely. Everything is in us is this extremely fine-tuned, delicate system and improving on it, again, I've been learning about some biochemistry stuff and the complexity of biological systems. The idea of improving almost seems absurd. It's like it's amazing that it works at all.
Mhm.
Improving on it would be improving things in a bigger sort of organ level way might be possible, but then you still have to take into account the biochemical balance of everything and making sure you don't upset that, because it's very easy to upset.
Yeah.
It's so complicated and fine-tuned.
Even
A little
something
tweak
as-
anywhere will make it fall apart. I mean, that's what a lot of diseases are, is just one little thing's out of place, and then a system falls apart, and all the other systems
Look at cancer.
eventually go with it. That's one thing, yeah.
And even upsetting something as simple as pH would be catastrophic, because
Yeah.
even like, that's why a lot of people would disagree, but like drinking too much coffee or like acidic
not
drinks.
Not like. I'm sorry.
Drinking too much coffee or something as acidic as even
Tomato.
soda or tomato, that you have buffers in your blood to prevent that from killing you, obviously, but overexposure to those different unbalanced pH substances is not
Well,
good.
May I make a suggestion here? I think both of you have some background in this and probably know enough to know where to research some more. And I think both of you are in a situation in which it would be wise to have some more little projects coming in, and there's so many that could be spawned from what we're talking about now.
I have recently found myself vast amounts of research and work and practice to do, so I don't think I actually have time for another topic to research at this point.
You can just turn in some of your research on the stuff you are working on.
But do you want to look into it? I'll look into it and also suggest some reading matter and resources and see what I can find. But would you like to put something together there? Just, for example, similar to the little research paper and links that Xander posted this last week, which a set of annotated links, as he's put in, takes a little bit of work to put it together, but it's a lot of it presents a lot of value for the rest of the class.
I don't think I'm knowledgeable enough about any
Well-
of these subjects to even find links to those.
I'm actually not either. Most of what I know about this, like basically everything I just said, is ideas that I've been getting from Darwin's Black Box.
Mhm.
And that book is almost the extent of my knowledge on biochemistry.
And indeed, it is one specific perspective on it. I
Yes.
realize that. I still think that learning how to do a little research is not a big deal. This is something that you
Not
just start out on
necessarily.
Wikipedia. You don't quote Wikipedia, but you start out there because it'll take you everywhere else, and see what you can find that way. When we're looking at genetic modification, and specifically we're talking about on the human being,
Yeah.
so many questions there start to arise. Not the least of which is, are we smart enough to do that?
Not quite yet, I would say.
I was,
Soon, maybe, but not yet.
yeah, and then I'm thinking along the terms of biotechnology and creating cyborgs and like mixing, like we are. Sorry.
We should go on to the next class.
Yeah.
Yes,
However much
yes. Let's do that. I'm going to wind this up for today.
Oh gosh.
And
Hey, can I ask one last question? Okay,
yeah,
oh, I think you're gone. Oh, okay, if we have like a video or an article that we want to share, where would I post that?
you can go ahead and post it into the writers' forum. Explanation around it, present a link, and I'll go ahead and put it in the mainstream of resources if it looks like it belongs there. But even in the writers' forum, we'll certainly all see it.
Okay, because I've been posting something to the open forum, and I was just curious here.
I'm sorry, I will have to check the open forum and make sure that I'm receiving things from it. It hasn't always been visible. Writers' forum, I certainly check all the time.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you all for participating, and let's put something together for genetic modification for next week, and suggest any other topics that seem interesting to you. As far as I can tell, we're aiming at having 2 more classes this semester. I will have to confer with my colleagues here and find out what everyone else at the school is doing, and we'll let you know online. Okay, let's bring today to a close, and we'll see you all next week. Please keep posting things. Bye-bye.